"Don't look into the eclipse, Mardo," an old friend of him warned him despite his blacked-out view of the world. Mardo glanced to the side despite his eyes being blanketed by darkness. Due to the warning, Mardo tightened his eyes wistfully. "I'm blind. What is there to see? Is the view pretty?" he asked. Due to his blindness, Mardo often overanalyzed things as much as possible. When a sense is lost in a human's body, the body's other senses are heightened, whether that includes smell, touch, hearing, or taste. And for Mardo, it was like a spiritual awakening. Like a bat, he could dictate his surroundings using echolocation by sending inaudible ultrasonic waves through the air that would bounce off the walls to send him back a feedback on the background of the place. Using that sensation, he could tell when there was something off about the woman next to him, almost like she was wearing a fake mask of a person she wasn't. He recognized the voice, but not so much the structure of her face, and using his senses to texturize the grooves of her bones, her cheeks, lips, and eyes, but he couldn't see. He once more clenched his eyelids shut, as if sight was a phobia of his. "Yes, it is. It's stunning, actually," she had said, her face smiling at something, reminiscent of an action she had done moments prior. She stepped forward, the sound making Mardo's ear twitch heavily. Her footsteps were off balance, indicating she was on a substance of some kind, uneasy and quirky. The black world seemed darker than usual, and that was because the moon was starting to fade in front of the sun, blocking the light from hitting their skin. Mardo could feel it, but not see it. The woman took another step forward, making Mardo step backward in response, tiptoeing. "Why are you nearing me?" He had said as the celestial body covered the sun 1/4 of the way through, blocking more of the light from the black world. Mardo's senses were off the charts, the surroundings around him turning more sinister with every growing second. Mardo thought it was because of the light being masked, which reminded him of the deceitful facial structure of the woman that was unbeknownst to him. He took another step forward, running his back against a wall, anxiety building in his chest. His heartbeat created a song, 3 thumps, loud and clear. "Because you're stepping away from me. Why? Are you scared?" she asked with the tone of sarcasm that she usually has. Her footsteps became more aggressive and quicker. His senses spiked like a sales pitch, and Mardo noticed a threatening detail in her tire. Blotches of unknown substances were plotted across her shirt and pants, maybe heavy dots of oil from her job, but even Mardo knew it was something more treacherous. Mardo felt more sunlight leave his skin, reminding him to shut his eyes tighter. The heat turned him cold, but his palms were still sweaty. The moon had now covered 1/3 of the sun, turning the yard and cement ahead of him dark and void of the sunlight. Void of any expression. A hidden tension built, as someone who used to be familiar to him had now terrified him beyond apology. There was a numbness. "You're starting to scare me. Get away. What the hell is that on your shirt? What happened to you?" he screamed desperately, still trapped by the gritty wall behind his back. She stepped towards him, but Mardo was unable to escape the nightmare. The woman with the unclear face dashed into him, her hands clawed out frontward like she was going to screw out his eyes. Of course, the feeling of a sharp nail digged into his cheek, crawling to his iris. The creasing sensation had scared him further. The moon covered a slither more than half of the lodge star in the sky, now acting as a ticking time bomb for Mardo's demise. Her ambitions were unknown, but they were sinister, that's for sure. "Open them, Mardo. Stare into the sky. Look at its beauty," she screamed, her voice becoming hoarse as her spiraling mental health deteriorated. Mardo shivered. Mardo, of course, continued facing the captivating symbolic message of the solar eclipse. He moved his head upwards, sensing the direction of the concentrated darkness, and responded to its call. The moon was almost covering the whole of the sun. However, his eyes shot open with force, along with the jerk of his body falling forward as if the moon was pulling him to be enlightened, like he was traveling through the spaces and zooming past stars and running into the moon as if it were choosing him to be the next one. It was like the Celestials had chosen him for a higher life, a greater cause. So when his bat-like senses vibrated uncannily, unable to sense any of the changed areas, he had a pulse of excitement. However, that joyous intent was stripped of him as he felt the fabric covering his body, and a smooth silk sheet under his hands that were clenched with fear. His mind screamed with exhaustion and victory. None of it was real. The entire situation moments ago was just a dream made up by his lingering brain. The thing was, it felt all too real. He swore he could feel the pressure under his skin, the etching of a fingernail, the heat of the sun. It seemed too odd to throw it off as a coincidence. But he threw his blanket off him, got off the bed, and walked towards the door of his bedroom. His senses had finally returned, wavering him from stimuli and responding to the room. The window appeared to be glowing, making it clear it was during the daytime. The radiating heat waves of the sun and the frequencies he could tell made it all vibrant. He walked through the thick carpet, breaking down the scenery of his house. There was someone knocking on the door, the vibrations causing his ear to pop with agony and spreading across the house and reverberating through and into the walls, making it shake. Immediately answering the door was an old friend of Marco's, the same woman that was in the dream, in fact. The thing was that Mardo could sense the emotions of people, and often those imprints leave a trace to their personality, which allows him to tell who a person is based on their impressions alone. These emotions are the reason why he often can predict the things that people are going to say before they even say it. "Are you free today?" she asked, reaching out to shake his hand. Mardo winced, suddenly feeling odd about the interaction because of the vision, his dream, of course. It was childish of him to do so, and he had responded with a chance. "Sure, everyone is out of the house today." His voice peaked with uncertainty, but he didn't accept that it was just a primal sense of fear building within. "Great, I got some tea to tell you." She walked in, still oddly touching Mardo's hands, her clingy nature seeping into his skin. The two then walked into the living room and sat down on the two rocking chairs. Mardo's senses once more started to fail him, a feeling he obtained often when he was around his friend Ayla. It was portrayed as a spiraling sensation engraved into his skin receptors, making it feel as if he were high, hijacking the system with churning gears ripping inside of his nerves. Mardo frowned, feeling uneasy because of the spectacle caused by this woman. "Can I tell you something?" Mardo had asked. The dream was still haunting him in the form of a flashback. His touch receptors kept strobing back of those vibrations of that dream, the blotches of substance on her clothes to the unsettling feel of the sun disappearing for Mardo. Another odd thing about his skin receptors was that with the way he sensed things, he can often feel things that were next to him, as if he could feel the texture of the stones around him, or if he could feel the tangly of the carpet or the curly of someone's hair. It was an odd way to describe it, but of course, her oddly optimistic voice was shaking with uncertainty, and Mardo couldn't help but shiver. Maybe she already knew. Her face was back to normal, adding another threat to that moment, highlighting the difference of the dream and the present. "You seem unsettled, Mardo. Is there something wrong with you?" Her voice could only be described as appealing madness. "No, maybe, well, just kind of," he swallowed. I just had a dream last night." "We all usually do." Optimism was leaking through her vocals. "No, but like, you know, the bad kind of dream," he had responded. "Oh, so like a nightmare? What kind? What happened?" "Mardo, you know you're too old to be scared of nightmares." She seemed annoyed and unwilling to listen to his problems. Often, unempathetic people carry those traits. "Well, it wasn't a nightmare. It was something different. I can't really describe it." In Mardo's blank eyes, he felt there was a distinct contrast between a nightmare and dreams. One he didn't know yet, something he couldn't explain at the moment. "Well, it started with the solar eclipse," he began. "Really?" Her body jolted up like answering a question in science class. "You know there's one coming up soon, right?" Mardo could feel her playing with her nails, unbothered. Her thoughts made the dream feel more meaningful. "Well, don't worry, I can buy some special glasses so we can watch it together. Despite your blindness, it's important to be safe, you know? The rays can kill your retinas." "Well, yeah," my receptors returned to that sensation again, choking my brain and trapping it inside a metaphorical box, like mini insect fingers crawling up my legs, arms, and waist, tinkling away at my skin. "Oh, sorry, continue." I shivered and she waved her hands apologetically. "So, you were there and you had like a different face." His description made her scrunch her nose weirdly, and an ember of rage had sparked within her as if that line had triggered her. However, Mardo ignored it and continued his story. "You walked towards me and told me not to look into the eclipse. And even though you already warned and told me not to specifically look into the eclipse at the beginning of the dream," he gasped, taking a deep breath to avoid letting anxiety capture him again. Then, the dream ended. Obviously there was more details inside of the dream that he wanted to say, but he didn't want to make the story stretch on for too long to avoid her getting annoyed like she already was. "I still think that would be a nightmare though, but besides, you know I wouldn't do something like that to you. We've been friends for too long." Her voice and expression seemed to fade away at the topic of something else, and there was a hint of jealousy hidden behind her voice. "But there's another friend that's been around us for too long." Her voice cracked, coming out in waves of coils, like bacteria injecting DNA into a cell. "Who? You sound jealous. What kind of friend would do that?" and after he said that, she snarled at Mardo again, her face and her smile just creeping into a different form. Jealous? No, she's just a dumb whore, she yelled. She stole the man I was talking to. She started her wrath of words. She thinks she's so attractive, running around and thinking every guy will love her because of her face. Well, she's wrong. You need a good personality too. Even you would know that. And obviously she has an ugly one too. There was a visible jealousy, as if he noticed her already. I just want to look as good as her, Mardo. She put her hands to her face. What do you recommend I do? I want the boy back. We had something together. Mardo frowned, unable to sympathize with her. He didn't really get much into the relationship side of things. He was, a lonely boy. He liked to stay inside of his house and stick to the hobbies that he did have. What do you want me to recommend? Tips to look better? You know I can't see faces, Ayla. You know this. I bet you're very pretty, he expressed. Well, I'm sorry, I guess I'm just looking for someone to talk to, she had responded, the first human sentence she had in a while. That helps too. Having an insert to tell your problems usually helps me a lot, he whispered, noticing a change in her emotions again. Like a shifting mirror. But I don't think there's a way to make yourself look better, Ayla. The only thing I recommend is to wait for the right guy. The guy that's right for you won't leave you for another girl, no matter how attractive that girl is. Ayla wasn't taking his advice the right way and instead it took it negatively, as if he called her ugly to her face. There was only one line that stuck with her the most. There is a way to make myself look better, and your advice isn't helping, it's making me feel worse, she screamed, standing up from her chair and violently rocking it back and forth. Screw you and your damn antics. Calm down, I'm sorry, Ayla. You know I didn't mean it like that, he responded. Maybe learning how to do better makeup would help? And that line had only added fuel to the fire. You just love insulting me, huh? No, I have something better in mind. She tapped off into the distance, stopping on the floor as she approached the door, alarming his internal core. Plastic surgery? How are your parents going to approve of something as expensive as that? There was an assumption, and the point had gone right over his head. What parents? Think more, there's something even better. She opened and slammed the door, and that slam had again vibrated the entire house to Mardo, and had thrown him into a sensory overload that made him cover his ears. What was she hinting at? Mardo's swirling sensation quickly faded, leaving him in despair. Mardo wondered why he felt lonely, but couldn't pinpoint the answer. So, as the rocking chair kept swaying back and forth, he decided to fall back into a trance, into a sleep. There wasn't really a distinct transition for someone who was blind like him, so often he couldn't distinguish reality from a deep sleep. It was an often fact. Sometimes when he would get knocked unconscious or when he would go to sleep, it was just transitioning through time, like following through a timeline that he couldn't change. This time, he could feel that he was inside of a dream. And in this dream, a woman had screamed from behind, "Mardo!" Finally, his senses adapted to the change of scenery. Large gusts of wind howled in the air, and around him were autumn trees amid fall. Pumpkins brawl around his feet, indicating late October and the Halloween antics. Yes? He responded lightheartedly, recognizing the voice almost immediately. Of course, it was Ayla. It's been a while, but I'm back from Europe. Don't you remember me? Mardo winced, seeming to remember this moment as if it was a flashback within his dream. It was when Ayla confessed a dark secret about her origin, which stuck Mardo forever. There was a distinct description that defined a nightmare for Mardo, but this vision was clearly defined by that description. And this was Mardo having a nightmare. The imaginary boundary between that and a dream was evident. Of course, Ayla, how was the vacation? He asked, unaware of her intentions and reasoning. Great. We saw the Eiffel Tower, the London Bridge, and even the pyramids. Her voice seemed enthusiastic, ready to incorporate. Mardo sensed her face-changing expression quickly, a habit she often had trouble getting rid of. He knew it was from a form of bipolarness in her brain, a trait Mardo could see in her from the very first moment that they had met. That's cool. Did your mom take any pictures? Since, you don't have a phone. Ayla looked at him weirdly, as if the question had broken down her insanity. Her face was perplexed, and her core was changing shapes again. Mom? She had asked. Yeah, your mom. The person who gave birth to you. Her eyes seemed to swirl into madness, and Mardo sensed a change in the atmosphere, as if her breakout was changing the exact nature that they stood in. Birth? Mardo's skin started to get goosebumps and his touch receptors had exploded into those spirals again, and her expression continued to flush. "You seem confused." "I am, didn't I tell you?" she said, with her voice shaking with craziness. This woman held a trait not even a human could possess. "Tell me what, Ayla? You're starting to scare me." There was another assumption. "I don't have a mom," she whispered out of the sliver of her mouth. "I wasn't birthed, I was formed." She was mentally ill, and that was the title Mardo always had given her after this moment. "My weaknesses don't exist, and neither do my strengths. I'm a manifestation of fear. Fears only people with issues have." Mardo shivered, the trees following his wake. "Your fears are just latching onto me and feeding my ego. Mardo, you're scared of me, aren't you? Even if you are, that just feeds into my power and makes me scarier, and I would say stronger, but like I said, I don't have any strengths." Her skin has started turning and turning out of control, and he felt his mind be masked by a metaphorical box that was spinning at a velocity that he couldn't comprehend. He ran away, letting the woman rant about her feasts of fear and her self-identification. It only took a matter of seconds for him to jerk open again, wake up, and sense the room taking change. It took a risky second to adapt. Mardo stood up aggressively. He had to find Ayla. There was a creeping suspicion building within him after that moment of something that she would do, like something straight out of a horror movie. Quickly, he reached the door and slammed it behind him. His senses told him that it was daylight outside and the heat was unbearable. It was in the middle of July, maybe. The sidewalk remained calm, but the molecules in the air differed. The scenery was black again. Mardo continued walking down the side of the road looking for answers. Now that he had time to wonder, he noticed that he never learned where Ayla had lived, which struck him as odd. They'd been friends for years, and so why hadn't he been informed? Mardo ran up towards the side of the road, making turns when necessary. At the end of the beaten-up alleyway was a large grocery store, the only one in the area. The alleyway was one in a kind, scattered with potholes and grainy gravel, and on the side of the road was a railroad track boosting importance. And further from that was a large warehouse for storing potatoes. He looked in front of him, remembering the goal to find Ayla. Maybe Ayla was hiding in the grocery store. He walked down the road, around the back of the building, through a canopy with chairs and an eating area outside, and then into the store's entrance. Once inside, he frantically searched to see if he could sense her presence. No one was familiar, just tons of people eagerly waiting to get out to their items. From the entrance, based on what Mardo's senses could perceive, there was a large service desk with tons of money stored away. Next to that was a self-checkout machine, 4 of them, and an irritating system that customers hated, and in response, a message was heard that bothered Mardo deeply. Quote-unquote, "Please put your items in the bagged area," which was a twitching ringing in his head as if it had boosted something inside of him. He twitched, scanning to the left side of the building. He strafed through the crowds of people attempting to leave, reflecting the rest of the building. An impulse was sent forward from his veins, bouncing off the walls and into the store, allowing Mardo to sense every portion of the store in a second. The thing was that there was a benefit to his blindness, and that was the ability to sense more than what the naked eye could see. Not that Mardo knew the difference in the ratios, but it was a tactic used against. He couldn't see, so his body had adapted to it to make sure that he could sense anything else around him. So it was a benefit to not being able to see as much as someone could, but as well, it can have a higher surface area of sense to the normal average human being. And the abundance of people inside the store made it impossible to sense if Ayla was close, no matter how much he sensed the emotions. He sensed all the emotions inside the store at once, everything gathering inside into a spike inside of his heart that he couldn't differentiate between each emotion. He felt anger, he felt joy, he felt sadness, he felt excited, he felt all these other emotions that couldn't be distinguished because of the fact that there was too much, a sensory overload, you could say. In his steps, 6 check stands were open and ready for use, and he had no clue why it was so busy at the time. At the end of those stands was a huge coffee shop, also filled with motivated customers, so as he continued walking. Past the coffee shop was a seating area where he would find at least one of his friends sitting down enjoying a iced coffee. Again, "Mardo!" an unknown female voice piped up from the corner of the area, but it wasn't Ayla. However, as she walked towards her, he oddly recognized her face, desperately sending chills down his spine. "Hey?" he responded with uncertainty. "Do I know you?" "No, well, I mean, sort of. Ayla told me about you. Really? What did she tell you? He was desperate for an answer and her whereabouts. How you can read emotions real well and sense the area with ultrasonic sound waves. She seemed amazed by his complexity and even inched closer to touch him. What am I feeling right now? She put her soft hands on his, clasping them together in harmony. Her skin was smooth, and her facial structure seemed to have an attractive tone. Long eyelashes, thick luscious hair, and glowing eyes. She smiled, noticing Mardo's hairs on his arms point upwards, sensing her soul from the inside. Her heart was slow, her brain had short impulses, and her face seemed flustered yet slightly anxious. You're scared, but not in the old-fashioned way, like you have some sort of anxiety. She gasped and pulled her hand away from him, slowly but not too far. She adored his touch a little bit. Are you a fortune teller? Can you read minds? She asked, taking her other hand in Mardo's and slowly caressing it with her thumb. Her deep persona radiated kindness and perseverance, a trait Mardo can sense from the get-go. Her cheeks gained a heat and flustered with charm inexpertly. The two had a tension between them, feeling each other's presence. On her cheek, though, were light freckles spread across her face, like little dots. I'm no mind reader, I can just sympathize with people real well. It's a trait I gained from being blind for so long. It just comes naturally. He explained, sensing another deep emotion swirling within her brain. There was a sense of regret. Her mind was racing with the thought of something she wished she could change, and Mardo had sensed that. Yes? Her cheeks fluttered deeply, along with the lining of her intestinal tract. When humans get flustered, the lining around their digestive tract also gets inflamed. You feel regretful. What's bothering you? She gasped, but this time taking her hands off him completely. You said you couldn't mind read. She pointed her finger at him, and he winced, somehow predicting that this would happen. I can't. You just know that regret's a primal human emotion, right? Her mind calmed down, keeping her secret safe. But that relaxation after his words spiked curiosity and suspicion within him. I'm sorry, it's just that... You're right. I feel regret for something indecisive that I did. She let her words speak for her. They flowed out of her mouth, even if her brain tried stopping her from speaking. It was a phenomenon many people got around when they were around Mardo. It was a feeling of urgency to talk about their hardships, and she had vented to him, furthermore proving that theory. I'm here to talk about anything. You can speak with truth. Her hands guided back into his, caressing his skin as if then there were a spiritual lockhold, a threshold that he can sense anything about her. I'm talking to this guy, right? The words shook Mardo straight with fear. And he used to talk to our friend, Ayla. She shivered with the hinge of sadness, and Mardo crept forward, his smiling, harboring fear. And there was more silence. Mardo had no words. Well, I didn't mean to. He was cute, sure, but I would never do her dirty like that. That lustful little man didn't understand boundaries and broke contact with Ayla completely. He told her that he found a prettier woman than her and that she would never be pretty, she ranted. Mistakes happen. Maybe you can talk it through with her. Maybe she'll understand. Mardo took her hands closer and gave her a meaningful hug. Feeling her warmth, Mardo felt a little spark of light awkwardness and butterflies within her stomach. She blushed, leaving him an impression of self-awareness and acceptance. Thanks, Mardo, she said with a low voice. What's your name? He had asked. My name's Leah. She smiled once more as Mardo distanced himself and collapsed from the hug. There was a moment of silence before Mardo could sense another presence creeping from behind, and it was a presence of jealousy. She was right behind them. He turned around, facing the direction of Ayla, who had a scrunch of wrongfulness on her face. That sense of jealousy was already proven right. Oh, so now you're stealing my friends too? Ayla screamed, looking at the two fiercely. Well, come down, Ayla. This isn't what it looks like. Leah just wants to talk to you in private. Mardo stepped away, attempting to get distance from the mentally ill woman. There's some misconceptions, he whispered. I'm sure you two can figure this out. Misconceptions? No, she's just a jealous brat who uses her looks to persuade men, she screamed, making a significant scene in the area. Mardo walked up to her and grabbed her hands peacefully, moving her towards Leah slowly. Just sit down, take a deep breath, and relax. She didn't comply well, and that feeling of spirals had slithered across his skin once more, decaying his senses, delaying the way he could feel around the area. She sat down on the other side of the table, away from Leah, but her mouth was foaming and her eyes shook with craze. "I'll leave you two at it. If you need me at any time, I'll be at home. Just stop by." He turned around, facing the direction of the exit. He didn't want to leave the two alone, but at the same time he felt that if he stayed, there would be some buildup of fear, and that he would just make situations worse. Maybe if they could figure it out together, alone, it would help the situation. But there was a buildup of fear within Leah that Mardo can sense from even a few feet away from them. It was like seeing a graph and seeing the lines spike up all suddenly. Ayla wasn't scared, but she held a spark of realization as if the two had already solved their feud. These types of emotions could also be felt within Mardo. Usually he couldn't feel exact manifestations of their thoughts, but if their body had changed movement or their brain had changed senses, he could often sense this kind of realization within them. Mardo was seconds away from leaving when an establishment employee stopped him. The employee had long, curled, dark strands of hair parallel to Mardo's. His senses impulsed off his clothes, reflecting the attire on his brain. He couldn't sense the color of exact things, but it's like seeing or sensing the fabric can kind of tell you if it's lighter or darker in parallel. "Hello?" Mardo asked, trying to get past him to return home. The employee's name tag read Tony, and he smiled at Mardo despite his milky eyes but no vision. The man frowned. "I need to talk to you for, just research purposes of what happened back in that seating area. It just needs to be recorded for store policy." "Oh, it's just some teenage girls arguing over a guy. If you want, you can kick them out. I doubt they're causing much trouble. They're just trying to talk things out over there." Mardo had smiled, continuing to walk toward the entrance. The man simply took the hint that he didn't want to talk and walked away from the scene, writing something down on a notepad. Mardo also left, ready to return home. In his sleep, Martin often felt himself closer to spirituality. He felt his soul was more vibrant during those moments of dreaming, and there was a more profound meaning that they were telling him. One that he never paid much attention to. Mardo took slow steps down the alleyway again, passing the grocery store and into a gravel road. Except, with every longing foot was a darkening of the world. His heartbeat felt at the same time as his footsteps, and every time they aligned, he sensed the scene around him grow darker and darker, more sinister. It was like a rhythmic poem. His heart leaked of darkness that was caused by his brain. Mardo never got to see what he looked like, but he knew there must have been a ton of depressing qualities. His spirit returned to average, able to sense a new body in the sky, like a UFO or just some kind of huge meteoric rock hurling towards to end his life. But it was in the broad daylight, and the moon was orbiting in the shattered sky. Something bad was about to happen. Mardo can sense that. And when he returned home, he was ready to take another nap to get lost in his dreams again. That was another one of his hobbies. Exploring the human aspects of the dreams, but even he knew he was something more than humans, because he knew humans couldn't sense things with their hearts or with their nerves. However, when he walked into the living room, he noticed something was off. The TV was on, and the static buzzed louder than Mardo's startling nightmares and dreams. The static had overwhelmed his heart again, and his ears had popped once more, like glass shattering. The carpet was moist, and the rocking chair chalked violently back and forth with no core. The windows were glowing, and the outside seemed to have a hint of change. The air was off, turning the atmosphere nostalgic and scarce. Then, the television had sparked to life, showing a blaring vision of moving frames. Mardo stood up from the chair, facing the direction of the digital box. And in true static fashion, breaking news! Wear your Eclipse glasses, people! There have already been many instances of damaged retinas and cases involving people looking directly into the sun. If you wouldn't look into it normally, don't do it now. The TV turned off unexpectedly, making a loud, sparkling noise before losing power. Those spirals, again, returning. But he ignored it, and he was tired of the growing suspicion and the repetitiveness of it. Quickly, Mardo sprinted for the front door and attempted to get a feel for the groove of the outside. The sun, again, was still blazing with heat, but there was a glimpse of the shadow of the moon casting over the brightness, taking the warmth of his skin, stealing the brightness of the sun and reflecting it onto the moon. And when he walked down the sidewalk of his yard, alarmed by the presence of a woman sitting in the grass next to him. Of course, you could already tell. it was Ayla, or at least seemed to feel like her presence to Mardo. But again, the feeling of the swirls, and he didn't even want to mention it this time. There was something off about this time. This time it felt like it was corrupting his stomach, making it swirl like it did when he had butterflies, but it wasn't the good kind of butterflies. It was those kind of butterflies you get when you find out your mother died, or when you find out someone you love is in the hospital. It was that deep, churning, oceanic-like sense of fear and sadness. They both stared into the horizon of the sky together. And then, deja vu had struck him. "Don't look into the eclipse, Mardo," she warned him despite his blacked-out view of the world. Mardo glanced to the side despite his eyes being blanketed by darkness. Due to his warning, Mardo tightened his eyes wistfully. He wondered if he was able to make amends with Leah, a girl who was awfully pretty in Mardo's visions. "I'm blind, remember? What is there to see? Is the view pretty?" he asked. Due to his blindness, Mardo often overanalyzed things as much as possible. The sensation of vibrations returned to him, and he could tell there was something off about the woman next to him, almost like she was wearing a fake mask of a person she wasn't. Ayla never had that type of description to her usually. Her image was represented by coils and spirals, not deceitful patches. He knew her voice was not much of the structure of her face. He once more clenched his eyelids shut. "Yes, it is. It's actually stunning." Her face smiled at something, reminiscing of an action she had done moments prior, but it had only been minutes. What could have she done in the moments that Mardo was gone? Time wasn't a thing for Mardo. Maybe he couldn't tell the time right. Maybe hours had passed, and those hours had felt like seconds. She stepped forward, the sound making Mardo's ear twitch heavily. Her footsteps were off balance, indicating she was on some sort of substance, and the black world seemed darker than usual. And that was because the moon was starting to fade in front of the sun, blocking the light from hitting their skin. And all this repetitiveness had twitched his ear. It felt him feel off. The woman took another step forward, making Mardo step backward in response. "Why are you nearing me? And where the hell is Leah?" The celestial body covered the sun 1/4 of the way through, blocking more of the light from the black world. Mardo's senses were off the charts. The surroundings around him turned more sinister with every growing second. Mardo thought it was because of the light being masked, which reminded him of the deceitful facial structure of the woman that was unbeknownst to him. He took another step forward, running his back against a wall. He was trapped, and Ayla was only getting closer. "Because you're stepping away from me? Why are you scared of me? Didn't I tell you this before? That makes me hungry. I can feed off the fear that you feel, Mardo. Don't you remember?" And Leah's gone. Her footsteps became more aggressive and quicker. His senses, again, spiked like a sales pitch, and Mardo noticed a threatening detail in her attire. Blotches of unknown substances were blotted against her skin, her pants, her shirt. Maybe it was heavy dots of oil from her job, but even Mardo knew it was something more treacherous. He felt more sunlight leave his skin, reminding him to shut his eyes. The moon had now covered 1/3 of the sun, turning the yard and cement ahead of him, dark and void of the sunlight. "You're starting to scare me. Get away from me, and what the hell is that on your shirt?" She stepped towards him, but Mardo was unable to move back. The woman with the unclear face dashed into him, her hands clawed out frontward like she was going to screw out his eyes. The moon had covered a sliver more than half of the large star. Her ambitions were unknown, but they were sinister. "Open them, Mardo. Stare into the sky. Look at its beauty," she screamed, her voice becoming hoarse as her spiraling mental health had further deteriorated. Mardo shivered, but he continued facing the captivating symbolic message of the solar eclipse. He moved his head upwards, sensing the direction of the contrary darkness and responding to its call. But the darkness wasn't concentrated. It was more the sunlight, the rays that were at the edge of the moon were more concentrated than the darkness, and the moon was already covering the entire sun now. However, his eyes had finally shot open with force, along with the jerk of his body falling forward, but this time it was different. This time, he wasn't in his bed. This time, his eyes looked into the center of the eclipse, watching the sliver of light disappear from the center of the spheres, the corners of it. A glimpse of light escaped from the corona of the star, and its concentrated rays burst right through Mardo's retinas. If he were an average human, his eyes would have exploded with pain. But Mardo wasn't human. He was something more extraordinary. Can you see it, Mardo? The beauty? Her voice scraped away with the rasp and decay. The milky filter over his eyes disappeared, healing his retinas, dilating his pupils, and embracing his insights. I can, he stuttered, that same sliver of light becoming visible from his cornea. The moon, it was black, covering the white color of the sun, and all of these visions had started to overwhelm him at once. It was a different type of sensory overload, not one that he could feel, not one that he could sense. It was more sensory overload than his skin. This time, his eyes could actually pick up on the surroundings. It was like a revolution within his awakenings. Flares of bright white were behind the dark, large body of the celestial body in the sky. Mardo could see it, a trait gained from looking directly into the solar eclipse. His eyes twitched, absorbing the colors all around him. It was the first time he could ever use that word and hold the meaning. The grass was bright green, the trees had twinges of orange and brown, and the concrete was a dull gray. Mardo cried. He focused his new gaze on the woman next to him, but still, before he looked at her, he decided to look more into the atmosphere around him and just cherishing that sight that he could finally see things. The sky, although wretched and black and painted in void obsidian, he could see. Finally, the green in the bushes, even the little purple berries that were over the apple tree, and the green and red and orange ripeness of those fruits. But now, he focused his gaze on the woman, realizing why her facial structure was deemed so untrustworthy. The face wasn't hers. Ayla was a new person, a different person entirely. Her hair was tightly curly black with multiple streaks of purple and magenta, highlighting her connection with spirals. However, her face wasn't hers. Instead, it had red blotches of blood plastered all over her skin, and there were deep cuts on the edges of her face and her jawline, and across those cuts were metal stitches woven into the depths of her muscle, tissue, and bones. The skin tone and the color had changed completely when crossing over the metal stitches. A pale tone with freckles, like little dots of a marker. There was something deeply wrong with this woman, and it showed when her face seemed to be melting off her skull. The skin tones, the brown versus the white of her neck. Obviously, there was a new face sewn completely over her old one, making her 10 times uglier than what she would have been before. That thin layer of skin was peeling off of her own, proving that her skull didn't have the same structure as the face she had stolen. That looseness of the skin layer made her wrinkles more noticeable, indicating the lack of skill used to put the fake face on. Her eyebrows were rough and shaken, her lips were blood red and dried, and her cheeks were moldy. He could see every little detail about her, as if he had 20/20 vision. The green within her teeth and the different crusts that were building up across her face like bacteria festering deep inside of the surgical partition that she tried to put on. I wasn't attracted enough, Mardo. Does this look good on me? She said, clenching and clawing at her new face of blood and regret. She was in deep agony, screaming at the top of her lungs, making Mardo wonder if her throat was even hers. Do you think he'll want me now? I have her beauty, the beauty he wanted from me. Her raspy voice continued to worsen, scratching through the air like screeching metal. The metal stitches weakened in durability, reeking of that same weakness, barely containing the face into her skull as it continued to fall off of her like melted cheese on a pepperoni pizza. Is that... Mardo almost vomited. Leah? He recognized the freckles on her face. They were unmistakable. What the hell did you do to her, you freak? Mardo pushed Ayla to the floor, his hands pulsing with similarity. You don't think I'm attractive? She cried, crawling away from him. No, you're ugly as a rat. Get that fucking face off of you, Mardo screamed, running toward her with his hand reaching out. It was a parallel. She fell to the floor and banged her head against the thick concrete, cracking her fragile skull open and pulling blood into the concrete. That redness he could see, that crimson glow, he almost cherished it. He didn't want to feel like a psychopath, but it was that subtle, very subtle glint of the red of the blood that made him feel something deeper. Mardo's fingers dug into the layers of skin of her face and clenched through her stitches. She grabbed the metal-woven string used to sew everything together and ripped the seam out. His bloody fingers wiggled into the wound, and one by one, each little metal rod plucked out of her face like a needle piercing the fabric. The anatomy of the woman was revealed, revealing disproportionate face and muscles and placements. The color of the blood haunted him, that deep, brightening hue of red scared him and continued to astonish him once more. After he was done dissecting the barriers caused by the string, he took the layer of skin off her muscles. Peeling it back, the connective tissue peeled off, causing the sound of ripping fabric and material, as if there was glue between the two faces. The face's disappearance showed the exposed teeth and gums from the messy, bloody mess. Pink gums and brown, rotten cavities between the veins, arteries, and tissue. It was a jumbled up mess of it all, and Mardo had frowned. His first glimpse of sight ever was ruined by a psychotic woman with hopes of being attractive again. Anything that he had looked up upon to this point, even the colors, the sight, and the details of everything, it just all felt so grim, so gruesome. He looked down at her now lifeless body. Leah's face would never be attractive on you, but I bet her original face is worth 1,000,000 smiles. Mardo felt sympathy for the woman and even considered her looks to cause him to have a first crush, something Ayla would have hated hearing. But that didn't matter because they were both dead now, and the world was still black, but so were his eyes, which sparked back with color. Looking into the fading eclipse, he observed the scenery before him gracefully, something he thought he could never obtain. It was a clear reminder to himself that he could see the future in his dreams, and that's why when he was sleeping, he felt oddly connected to his soul. This was another theme that kept coming back to haunt Mardo, and this had caused him to hypothesize that when he had nightmares, they told his past, because he could remember that one scene of him in the forest with Ayla talking about the trip of Europe. He smiled now, able to understand the meaning of this encounter and the lesson that was meant to be taught by it. By the time he had realized all this, the moon was gone, and the eclipse, which hadn't lasted long, was finally leaving. And this left Mardo to reminisce about himself, looking back into the moments that happened under the timeline of the day. And now that he had matured over this time, he still had that odd connection with the celestial body, but instead of wanting to steal it, he wanted to be able to love it. The moon, of course. The eclipse of totality showed him what the world was really like, highlighting the importance of blindness when encountering a solar eclipse.